Wondering who I am? My name is Bruce Shaver, and I'm president of the GWU chapter of the Benjamin Rush Society, and I'm delighted that you could join us this evening. We know you have a choice in how you spend your time. We appreciate you choosing us. As you can tell from my hair color, which I prefer to call silver, connoting wisdom, as opposed to gray, depicting aging of indeterminate origin, I came to medicine after a varied career in business, venture capital law, military service, and education. And then I had a crazy idea to go to medical school. Now, actually, that was something I thought about for a while, but I wanted to finish my military service before I embarked on this wonderful but difficult endeavor. So it's an honor to be involved in the vital task of increasing bipartisan awareness of the importance of the doctor-patient relationship, which is what Benjamin Rush Society stands for. And now it's my great honor to introduce our executive director, Beth Haynes, MD. And I will be reading about her as well, so you have to hear from me a little bit longer. Beth is the new executive director of the Benjamin Rush Society, and as I mentioned before, but more specifically, the Society is dedicated to building awareness in the medical community and society of the challenges to and the importance of the doctor-patient relationship. She's an accomplished physician, having achieved board certification and practiced privately in both family practice and emergency medicine. She also has a passion for health policy formulation and advocacy, which is her current full-time focus. She brings extraordinary practical and professional skills and understanding to her new role, and is both an inspiration and honor for us to work with her. Now, one final thought before I let Beth speak. When I first met her, we were talking about ways to change this dialogue from a left-right focus to maybe let's enlarge access. And we came up with a phrase that we thought we'd like to share with you. So you may share it. We are committed to solving the medical care access problem through innovation, abundance, and an inviolate doctor-patient relationship. Now, why do we say this? As the quote implies, we see no reason why the entrepreneurial spirit that has helped champion the iPhone, the PC, the internet, HIV, antiviral drugs, and so on, cannot play a significant role in providing more effective, less expensive, and the key here is more abundant health care, anchored by a strong doctor-patient relationship. So thanks for your attention. Now please join me in welcoming Dr. Beth Haynes.
Thanks for coming and welcome. This is our first Benjamin Rush Society debate of the academic year, and I'm excited that we're having it here. Benjamin Rush, who knows who Benjamin Rush was? A few, okay. He was a physician in the time of the founding. He was the only physician to sign the Declaration of Independence. He was also a staunch abolitionist back at the time of the founding. He also was a very tireless advocate for humane treatment of the mentally ill. He was a professor of medicine and psychiatry back in the colonial days. So we felt, a very good person to be our figurehead, someone who was very devoted to the principles of individual rights, particularly life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And tonight we're going to debate about a different set of principles, but ones that really affect our country and our patients. As a profession, we construct codes of ethics which are relevant to us as in our roles as healers. These professional standards come from very deeply held beliefs about what is right and what is wrong. And from those ideas of what is right and wrong, we construct a set of fundamental principles to guide us in our interactions with our patients. There's some very long-held traditional principles upon which medicine has been functioning back for 2,000 years to the times of Hippocrates. That's beneficence, or what we call putting the interests of the patient first. There's also non-malevolence. I always have a hard time pronouncing that one, which what you might know as first do no harm. We also honor patient autonomy, which is really what we mean by that is fostering the ability of patients to make free, uncoerced choices. And embedded in that is truth-telling and also informed consent. These principles have really stood up to the test of time as being important ones guiding our interactions. And as young physicians in training, I'm sure that you're discussing what's the proper way to interact with your patients. These are key things. Well, now there's a new ethic that is being included in many of the codes of ethics, a new principle which is being introduced, and that is the idea of social justice. This was put 10 years ago into the charter for physicians. It was a physician charter on medical professionalism for the new millennium. It was put in the annals of internal medicine. It's been endorsed by over 100 physician professional organizations throughout the United States and in Europe. And the third tenet of this, along with the ideas of non-malevolence and of beneficence, is now social justice. What is meant by social justice? It means that now we need to include the duty of the physician to society in the medical ethics, as well as the duty and what we owe our individual patients. So it's presented in terms of justice. And the question is, what do we mean by justice? This is not the traditional definition of justice, one that I've thought of in terms of everybody playing by the same rules, or you reward virtue and you punish vice. But this is a different type of justice. It's an attempt made initially, maybe not initially, but maybe most eloquently by John Rawls back in 1971 when he published Theory of Justice. And it was an attempt to reconcile the very important values of liberty and equality. But underlying this new conceptualization of justice, some would say even a perversion of the original meaning of justice, is the fundamental question of what is the proper role of an individual in society. And as physicians, we're also citizens. So we're part of this, it's part of a larger debate as well. And the questions are, is it proper to view individuals primarily as members of a group, as part of the community, who are beholden morally and legally to the welfare of all that are within that group? This is the basic premise of all forms of collectivism, which include socialism, nationalism, and the political economy of the welfare state. Or is every individual to be respected fully as an end in themselves, each with a right to his life, but only to his own life, and that the way to interact in a social context is purely voluntarily? So this is the tension that we hope to clarify through tonight's debate. Can you, as physicians, truly attend to your individual patient's best interests while simultaneously being required by medical ethics to be the steward of what is being termed society's healthcare resources? Our country stands significantly divided, as evident from the last election, on matters of this ilk. The Benjamin Rush Society it hopes to create venues such as this where we can have civil discourse and come to learn to understand the various points of view and not just vilify each other and dismiss the arguments that we're making because we've said it's evil. With that, I'm pleased to introduce our esteemed moderator for this evening. It's going to be Mark Tapscott. I better put my glasses on for this and make sure I don't get anything wrong. Mark is the executive editor of the Washington Examiner. He was named Conservative Journalist of the Year in 2008 by CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Conference. He was inducted into the First Amendment Center Freedom of Information Act Hall of Fame in 2006. And before joining the Examiner, he was director of the Heritage Foundation's Center for Media and Public Policy. He founded their Database 101, a computer-assisted investigative reporting boot camps at the National Press Club. He's a former assistant managing editor and a managing editor of the Journal newspapers and the Washington Times. A longtime member of the Investigative Reporters and Editors, he's an advisory board member of the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity and has testified before the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives on issues of transparency and accountability. He appears regularly as an opinion analyst on Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and on talk radio programs. And now he can add to this impressive list of accomplishments his participation in the Benjamin Rush Society debates.
much, Beth. I'm indeed honored and pleased to be here tonight. I must say, the last time I was in a room surrounded on both sides by esteemed physicians, I was in a horizontal position, and they were very intently focusing on my chest. So this is a welcome change of scenery for me. I was struck in Beth's introductory comments, her mention of John Rawls' theory of justice, and the fact that he was attempting to reconcile these competing principles of liberty and equality. This is not a new debate. We have been debating how those two principles coexist in a democratic society since before the Constitution, since before the founding. I seriously doubt that we will resolve that debate tonight, but I can be confident in assuring you, having examined all four of our participants tonight and looked at their backgrounds and their qualifications, that this is going to be an extraordinarily interesting and enlightening discussion. A little bit about how we will proceed. The first speaker will have 5 minutes to defend the proposition, and I guess I probably should tell you what we're going to be debating tonight. It's I think, a perfect proposition. Before I became executive editor of the paper, I was the opinion page editor for 6 years. And towards the end of my tenure as opinion page editor, editorial page editor, I had a thought one night that if I had $1 for every time I had to type the word Obamacare, I could retire. This proposition that we're debating tonight reaches to the fundamental issue that is presented by Obamacare and indeed the role of the government in health. The proposition then is this: the requirements of social justice are in conflict with the requirements of an ethical doctor-patient relationship. Our first speaker will be upholding the proposition for 5 minutes, then be followed by the first speaker for the opposition, who will have 8 minutes. The second speaker then, who will be supporting the proposition, will have 8 minutes. The second speaker will then, for the proposition, will then have 8 minutes, and we will conclude with a 5-minute rebuttal by the first speaker. And if you're not thoroughly confused by the way I just described that, I admire you. And I just realized that I did not bring with me to this podium my notes. Beth, could you hand that to me? Yes, thank you very much. Let me tell you a little bit about our participants tonight. To my left, Dr. Rich Fogras is a former professor of medicine, medical practitioner, researcher, and author in the fields of cardiology and cardiac electrophysiology. He currently makes his living as a consultant with biomedical companies and as a writer. And if he can make a living as a writer, I'd like to talk to you afterwards.
It's mainly with the companies.
As I mentioned, he is from Pittsburgh. To my immediate left, Dr. Lee Heeb began her career in medicine at age 4. She's been at this for a very long time. She accompanied her father on house calls along the back roads of Iowa. She graduated from the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry in Rochester, New York, and completed an orthopedic residency in the United States Navy. After serving as a general orthopedic surgeon, I'm from Oklahoma City, and some of these long words are a little difficult. She served with the Marine Corps, returned to Rochester. She is the only woman to be appointed as the Lewis Goldstein Fellow in Spinal Surgery. To my right, physically, not ideologically, I suspect, Dr. Christopher Lillis is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Medicine, completed his internship and residency in internal medicine at Duke in Durham. He is a full-time internal medicine physician practicing primarily in primary care in Fredericksburg, Virginia. He also contributes to one of the better newspapers in Virginia, the Fredericksburg Freelance Star. And he's a member of the board of directors of Doctors for America, which I suspect has deservedly gained praise for its role in this national debate in recent years. Finally, Dr. Nilesh Kailan-Raman.
Perfect.
We'll go with it. He wouldn't let me call him Smith. He is the Chief Medical Officer at Healthcare for the Homeless in Baltimore City, Baltimore. He received his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Yale, his MD from in New York, SUNY, the Brooklyn School of Medicine, and he was an AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Institute for Health. Forgive me, but I do not know what those stand for. The American Association
Advancement of Science.
For the Advancement of Science. An interesting cause indeed. So, we know what we're here to talk about. We know who we are going to be listening to. After the debate is concluded, these folks have concluded their presentations. We'll have 15 minutes or so for questions. At the end, we will have a vote to determine the winner. You all have already had an opportunity, I assume, to make your present position known. The object of the debate is very much to persuade those of you who have a position now to change it. And I must say two more things for the participants in the debate. Number one, I am a newspaper editor, and you are on the record. Be careful what you say. And finally, the losers will be required to accept a permanent appointment as an executive member of the Independent Payment Advisory Board. With that said, our first speaker tonight is Dr. Heeb.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank Dr. Haynes and the students of the Benjamin Rush Society for inviting me. Well, as Dr. Haynes says, this is really a matter of definition. If you define social justice in the terms of classic liberalism, meaning equality under the law, regardless of race, creed, gender, sexual orientation, or anything you want to measure, we're all equal under the law, then there's really no problem. But when we talk about health care and social justice, that's usually not our definition. We usually go to the Canadian equality definition. Now, my friend Ralph is a Canadian, and his son, one time a few years ago, wanted to play basketball at high school. But his son had a problem. He was 6'7", and he wasn't allowed to play basketball in high school in Canada because that would be unfair to the short kids. And, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. That's really true. And so, too, in the theory that in medicine that unless everybody can have the latest surgical mesh, then nobody should have it. Or unless everybody can have the latest dialysis unit, then nobody should have it. Now, how do free markets deal with this? How do free markets work? Free markets work because, first of all, people pay cash for everything that's routine. And cash keeps costs down. It keeps quality high. Just think about Apple iPhones or iPads. People vote quality and price with their wallets. Competition makes everything better. And then we use health insurance as an actual insurance. It's not prepaid health care, but it's an insurance that people buy when they're 20. They carry it with them all their life. It's theirs. It travels with them. And when they pay into the system all their life, then when they get sick, it's there for them. But, you know, we'll say, well, but that's not fair because when a new product comes out, only the rich will have it at first, and it wouldn't be fair because some people will have better systems than others, some have better insurance than others. But the problem is that when you decide that it has to be fair, that everybody has to have it the same, then you have to have a third party to adjudicate that fairness. A friend of mine put out a commercial for the Vermont policy debate this year, and the commercial is a doctor talking to his patient in the exam room, and he's saying, you know, Mrs. Jones, with your rectal cancer now, we have various options. We could, you know, do chemotherapy, you could do radiation, the palliative treatment, and he goes through the various things, and then he looks at her and he says, what do you think? And she starts to answer him, and then he says, oh no, not you. And then he turns, and there's this panel of 6 bureaucrats over here that are determining what she's going to get. Because if you're really going to make things fair, it can't be the doctor or the patient or the insurance company, it has to be this third government body that's going to make sure that everybody gets stuff. Now, the first tenet of medicine, the Hippocratic ethical doctor-patient relationship, is privacy, right? Privacy is the first thing to be sacrificed on this altar of social justice, because if everybody's going to be treated fairly in this system, nobody gets too much, nobody gets too little, you have to know what people are getting, right? I think it's hysterical, in today's world, if I divulge your private, and the idea, by the way, of privacy is so that your doctor, your lawyer, your priest, you can talk to them freely and you know it won't go anywhere. Well, in this world as it is now, under HIPAA, you've heard of HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Privacy Act. Anyway, if I tell my neighbor your little secret, your medical secret that you've told me, I can be fined into the poorhouse. But it is mandated that I tell a government bureaucrat everything about you, whether you're obese, whether you smoke, whether you have AIDS, your psychiatric history, all the things you probably don't want to be told to people. That is mandated when you're going to have a system that adjudicates fairness. So I would say that based on that proposition alone, the ethical doctor-patient relationship is disrupted, because you can't have privacy if you're going to have this idea of fairness.
Yeah, I think Beth's going to probably need the warnings for me. Hey, I so appreciate the opening comments by our moderator, because I think that it's important for all of us to realize this has been a debate in our country for going on close to 300 years now, and it's not something we'll settle tonight, but it's certainly vibrant for discussion. I think the way Dr. Hyde started her presentation was with a definition. And I would contend that the most brief definition of social justice is it's a philosophy that seeks an equality of opportunity, not an equality of outcomes. And there's a very important distinction there, because really when we talk about an equality of opportunity, that's how I view social justice and how many have defined it before. But there is a peer-reviewed journal article written by a Canadian gastroenterologist. And as you likely know, Canada has a single-payer system. It has a ratio of physicians such that there are plenty of primary care doctors and not too many specialists. And that's really the opposite of the United States. A prominent and valid criticism of the Canadian system is that their chosen solution to addressing the basic social justice of having access to medical care creates waiting lists for elective and non-emergent care. And so this GI doctor writes about a phenomenon that's currently occurring in Canada, whereas physicians are bending the truth in their referrals in order to have their individual patients jump the line. And his example was in regards to screening colonoscopies. But physicians can exaggerate the truth, exaggerating clinical need and urgency in order for their own individual patients to jump the queue, as they call it in Canada. So this dilemma in Canada is the result of inadequate specialty resources, somewhat created by a universal health insurance program. But to simply point to this without acknowledging the tremendous social good that is achieved through immediate access to primary care and emergency care, as well as urgent care, casts aside the principle of social justice as a central tenet of the practice of medicine. Social justice is integral to health policy and to everyday medical practice. It's unacceptable to disregard it because it's unjust for millions of people to lack access to health care and experience avoidable health outcomes. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane." You will know this personally if you ever volunteer in a free clinic, or attend a remote area medical event, or travel abroad on a medical mission trip. Suffering occurs due to a lack of access to basic health care. Preventable diseases ravage human beings who are each endowed with their own inherent personal dignity. And this could easily be addressed with a healthy dose of social justice in the practice of medicine. Social justice, in fact, is widely accepted and publicly expected principle in the practice of medicine here in the United States. We have long adopted the concept of social justice in healthcare, and society shows its disapproval when those tenets are violated. The easiest example is the United Network of Organ Sharing, or UNOS. This is the system that we use to allocate organ transplantations to individuals in need. It's built on the concept of equity and social justice and inequality of opportunity, which is inseparable from the concept of social justice. When a celebrity or a wealthy individual receives a transplant, seemingly jumping the line ahead of those with a greater need, they often are shunned in the popular media and people disapprove. Social justice has more recently made its way into the field of bioethics. Discussion involves topics such as affordable access to health care, especially for low-income households and families. The discussion also raises questions such as whether society should bear healthcare costs for low-income families, and whether the global marketplace is a good thing to deal with healthcare. Ruth Faden and Madison Powers of the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics focus their analysis of social justice on which inequalities matter the most. They develop a social justice theory that answers some of the questions in concrete settings. Social injustices occur when there is a preventable difference in health states among a population of people. These social injustices take on the form of health inequities when negative health states such as malnourishment and infectious diseases are more prevalent among an impoverished nation. Dr. Edmund Pellegrino, who works across town, he was my mentor at Georgetown. He was the recent former director of the Center for Clinical Bioethics at the Georgetown University Medical Center, and he was the former chairman of the President's Council on Bioethics under President George W. Bush. He does not see a conflict between individual patient care and social justice. In fact, he feels the balance between patient autonomy and social justice are what's needed in today's practice of medicine. He states, "Medicine is a profession that demands of physicians extraordinary moral sensitivity as they respond to patient vulnerability." He notes that physicians have obligations both to their patients and society, and modern challenges demand our profession to evolve. After years of scholarly study, Dr. Pellegrino published his precepts, meant to be a modern-day replacement to the Hippocratic Oath. The first precept reads, "To place the good of the patient at the center of my professional practice, and when the gravity of the situation demands above my own self-interest." Combining his precepts 5, 6, and 12, he instructs the physicians to, quote, "care for all who need my help with equal concern, independent of their ability to pay," to, quote, "act primarily in behalf of my patient's best interests and not primarily to advance any social, political, or fiscal policy or my own interests," and finally to, quote, "to fulfill my obligation to society to participate in public policy decisions affecting the nation's health by providing leadership as well as expert and objective testimony." Dr. Pellegrino teaches that physicians possess a social responsibility as we find ourselves practicing the art and science of medicine in complex political and financial environments. We must guard ourselves against financial corruption and the monetary conflicts of interest that can lead us to betray the first precept, holding our patients' interests above our own. Dr. Pellegrino asserts that our ethics need to rest upon the philosophical foundation that understands that medicine requires particular moral vigilance, and that this is due to the vulnerability of the patient, the idea that we possess the power in the physician-patient relationship. We possess all the knowledge, we possess all the ability to advise our patients well or poorly. And health is a common good, not a commodity. And physicians feel a social need to provide for the health of a population largely through the individual care of members of that population via the sacred physician-patient relationship. We can look deep into history at the origins of the Hippocratic Oath and see language rooted in social justice and moral responsibility to our patients. But the individual physician, as I practice medicine, can balance social justice and the fiduciary responsibility we have with our patients. When available, I can choose a generic medicine instead of a brand name medicine, thereby lowering the total societal costs and the cost for my patient. I can follow guidelines not to over-test when tests are not going to help my patient. Again, preserving critical resources. But we're always going to, and I'm always going to, test when this clinical circumstances call for it. I'm going to avoid unneeded hospitalizations for my patients. And this is increasingly becoming not just a social good, but a personal good when we think about the fact that hospital-acquired infections and medical errors are dangerous for our patients. But rationing in the face of medical need does not ever have to occur if we simply balance the social and individual good. Thank you. I'm out of time.
Good evening. The doctor-patient relationship is a fiduciary relationship, a relationship bound in trust. The patient agrees to award the doctor his or her confidence, and the doctor in turn agrees to place the patient's best interests above all other considerations. This is what patients have always expected, what doctors have always strived for, and what everyone else, including malpractice juries, have all insisted at all times should be the standard. And for over 2,000 years, This fiduciary relationship defined the profession of medicine. This all changed in 2002 with the adoption of a new charter of medical professionalism, which formally obligated physicians to work for social justice at the bedside. This charter, in my opinion, is the suicide note of the medical profession. Social justice, according to the progressive guru Harold Leswell, is the practice of deciding who gets what, when, and how. It is distributive justice, differential justice. And in the context of healthcare, social justice requires the distributor to distribute medical services to some and withhold them from others according to the distributor's idea of equity. I contend that for physicians to work as distributors of social justice is disastrous for patients and ruinous to the medical profession. And to support this contention, I will make 4 simple points. Point 1, it is axiomatic that what's good for the collective is often, very often, not what's good for the individual. Farmer Jones has 10,000 head of cattle on his dairy farm. He knows that if he adds a certain antibiotic to their feed, he can increase his yield of milk by 7%. He also knows that, unfortunately, about 1% of the animals will be allergic and will have a fatal reaction to the antibiotic. Now, there's a test he can do to decide which animals are allergic, but the test is very expensive, and besides, the cost of separating the allergic animals every day at feeding time would be prohibitive. We all know what Farmer Jones will do. What's good for the herd and what's good for the individual are, in fact, independent variables. Sometimes they move in the same direction, often they move in opposite directions. And those who are tasked with distributing social justice, who have to decide who gets what, when, and how, will have to make a choice between the two. You can't have it both ways. Point 2, social justice does not merely mean avoiding unnecessary tests and treatments. Practicing medicine efficiently is simply good medicine. And the imperative to do so is nicely covered by traditional medical ethics. We never needed to devise any new ethical imperative to obligate doctors to not give unneeded medical services. That has always been their duty. And in fact, the new charter itself makes it plain that the imperative to social justice is in fact something new. It requires physicians to work for the fair distribution of healthcare resources, not only through policy, but at the bedside. Indeed, the penultimate version of the charter specifically admonished physicians that in making decisions for their patients, they cannot always choose what's best for the individual, but instead they must, quote, be aware that the decisions they make about individual patients have an impact on the resources available to others, end quote. Social justice at the bedside fundamentally divides the loyalty of the physician between the needs of the patient and the needs of the collective. Point 3, patients simply cannot trust, nor should they trust, a physician who is practicing social justice. It is impossible today for a patient to know whether the doctor's recommendation is truly what's best for them, or instead whether it's what the doctor judges to be the best they deserve, given the constraints of social justice. And to compound this violation of their fiduciary obligations, physicians have chosen not to disclose to their patients the real implications of their new imperative to social justice. Instead, they have chosen to mislead their patients, and likely themselves, with the sorts of soothing blandishments that we may hear from our esteemed opponents tonight. And when patients finally figure out, at last, what their doctors are really up to, they are going to be pissed. Point 4, it doesn't have to be this way. Let's say you are arrested for robbing a bank. Let's say that the arrest was not unexpected because you actually did rob a bank. And let's say that you were caught red-handed, gun in one hand, cash in the other, the blood of the teller you shot spattered all over your white coat. Now, here's the question. What rights do you have? It turns out you have many rights. You have the right to a fair trial. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right of appeal, assuming that you won't like the verdict. But most of all, you have a right to a personal advocate, a trained professional who is obligated to place your vital interests above all others and to help you navigate a complex legal system that does not have your best interests at heart. Your lawyer, whatever he or she may believe about your guilt or innocence, is obligated by professional ethics to take your part and argue your case to the best of his or her ability, and operating within a system of rules laid out by society to leave no stone unturned in gaining the best possible outcome, not for society, but for you, the individual felon. And while the rest of us might rail and complain about these efforts to get you off, we all understand perfectly well that without these protections, not only would accused citizens be horribly abused, but society itself would become coarsened and dangerous for everyone. When you are sick and least able to fend for yourself within a complex and hostile healthcare system, you are supposed to have the same protections as when you rob a bank. And the doctor-patient relationship is supposed to see that you do. Tragically, the doctor's new obligation to social justice makes this impossible. There are ways to achieve social justice in healthcare without requiring physicians to disavow their most sacred ethical obligation. Just as there is a way to achieve legal justice without requiring lawyers to do so. But these methods are inconvenient to our political leaders, most of whom are lawyers, and so they have devised for us a system of social justice which is easier for them, but which utterly compromises the medical profession. This behavior is natural on their part. We should not be surprised by it. What is surprising is that the medical profession has capitulated so completely, so readily, and so disastrously. It is not too late to fix this problem, but first, doctors need to recognize that it is a problem, that bedside social justice is not something to be celebrated, but is something to be abhorred, avoided, and refused altogether. Our profession, our patients' lives, and our civil society utterly depend upon our doing so. Thanks for your attention.
Colleagues as well. Dr. Haynes mentioned ethics, and medical ethics is actually at the center of what we're talking about. Medical ethics contains, yes, beneficence, helping others, autonomy, having the right to make informed choices, and it's always included justice as well. What we're talking about is what is the framework for justice. This is not an abstract concept. This is something that I see every day. I've been working with the uninsured and the underinsured for over a decade now. I work in healthcare for the homeless. Most of my patients don't have any money to speak of. Every day I have to make decisions about how to allocate resources that are scarce and oftentimes barely existent. How do I do that? There has to be a framework for that, and social justice is a framework. It's not simply a catch-all garbage can term that means we want to help somebody, we want to say how we do things, or this, that, or the other. There's actually a philosophical principle that's at play in social justice. The first principle is that each person has an indefensible claim to equal basic liberties. Social justice is about the individual. It's about the individual and how we can maximize their basic liberties. It's very straightforward. The second principle of social justice is that when social and economic inequalities exist, each person should have an equal chance to take advantage of these social and economic opportunities. As my colleague noted, this is not about equal outcomes. It's never been. We don't have a society that has equal outcomes. I would love to have a society where my patients had 1/10 of what anybody in this room has. That would be a huge step up. Personally, I'm tired of watching every other person who comes into my office for the first time cry for 30 minutes because they don't have a house, their diabetes is now wildly uncontrolled because, well, they can't have any because they live in a shelter. I'm not quite sure what we get out of this as a society to say, well, there's winners and losers. Social justice addresses this issue specifically by saying inequalities work to everyone's advantage. But if we're going to have inequalities, then we should at least try to bias them towards those with the least advantage. So let's take some concrete examples of what we're talking about here. When we have scarce resources, if I want to get a pulmonary appointment for one of my patients, the waiting list is at least 3 months long, probably longer. It's being donated. I appreciate the donation of the services, but none of us would be happy with that regime. And that's okay. We understand that there's differences. But when I have a patient that comes in who has severe lung disease, she's got tracheal deviation, she's got spots on her lungs, I'm going to pick up the phone and call. I don't pick up the phone for every one of my patients. I'm making a decision to give differential care. We all do that. We all recognize that our patients are different. We can't allocate resources the same to everybody. And I don't think anybody's advocating that. Why is this fair? Is it fair to call up for this one person but not for the others? But there's a principle here. It's that this person is at a deep disadvantage. They have a very severe disease. That's very time sensitive. And so we recognize that if we were in that person's position, that we would want that done. And we can also understand from our own position why that person is being advantaged. There's still people getting their pulmonary appointments tomorrow, the next day. Nobody's stopping that. I certainly am not. We all recognize that there's going to be inequalities. Nobody's trying to eliminate those. What we're trying to do is create some fairness, and that's what social justice is about. It's making sure that people have their basic liberties. There's no liberty in illness. It's terribly debilitating. I see this every day. So when we talk about not too much or not too little medicine, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about not too little. And I know that we've had a great number of debates about the nature of healthcare in this country, well, for many decades, but particularly in the past few years with Obamacare. But let's be real clear about what is and isn't allowed. There's a difference between saying that insurance will or won't pay for something and saying that you personally can or cannot pay for something. And the two should not be conflated. Your liberty is preserved if you're able to obtain those services. There's nothing about the right of who should pay, just that you can obtain them. And so we have to keep those ideas separate, because I think that those get conflated a little too often. And I hear this often. My insurance won't cover this. From my patients too. And I say, yes, it doesn't. You can pay for this out of pocket. Well, no. Okay, that's fine. You have the option to. Social justice is about having the option to do something. It's not about saying that you're going to get something. But to my colleague's point about social justice at the bedside, we all have to make decisions about how we deliver care and what care we deliver when there's scarce resources. We don't have infinite resources. It would be lovely to have infinite resources, but we don't. When there's a flu vaccine shortage, we have to make a decision. Are we going to just vaccinate everybody who comes in the door until we run out and then say, hey, sorry? No, we try to have a more thoughtful process about how we're going to allocate our scarce resources. We have to make that decision, and in such an instance as a flu vaccine shortage, which is not theoretical, which has happened, we have to say, you know what? I'm not going to give it to you today because there's somebody who is in far greater need of it. Social justice is about a fair way to allocate scarce resources. The effects that we have with our patient interaction, the doctor-patient interaction has effects on others, just the same way that other doctor-patient interactions have effects on our relationship. We can't divorce that relationship from society. And so in order to do that in a logical and fair framework, we use social justice to give us something to hang our hat on. Thank you.
Okay, well, I love history, and a few years ago I wrote an article about the lessons of Karl Brandt. I got interested in Dr. Brandt because, like me, he was an orthopedic spine surgeon who did trauma. Now, unlike me, Dr. Karl Brandt was hung after the Nuremberg doctor trials for crimes against humanity. And his crime was that he believed that when the health of the nation is at issue, and for the good of society, the health of the individual wasn't as important. He applied cost-benefit analysis and the utilitarian ethic to his society as a whole. He didn't have doctor-patient relationship. He saw people as numbers on a board, and he could take some health care away from these people to give it to these people. Sometimes it resulted in the death of these people in order to make these people better. It was the greater good for the greater number of people, and sometimes we could hasten these deaths in order to treat these people. Now, in 1941, when the Germans marched into Holland, they demanded that the Dutch doctors all participate in this type of medical system. And the Dutch doctors who had a doctor-patient relationship and believed in one-on-one medicine said, no, we know these are not numbers, these are our patients. They may have disabilities, they may be psychiatric patients, but they have lives and families, and we know them, we're not participating. And some of the Dutch doctors went to the death camps themselves rather than participate. In fact, actually, they were such a pain in the ass to the Germans that the Germans said, if you don't participate, we're going to take away your medical license. No problem. 100% of the Dutch doctors turned in their medical license rather than participate. But let's fast forward to today, because today in the Netherlands, they have the system the Nazis wanted to give them. Government controls all health care, and government, in their distribution of fairly to distribute scarce resources, they don't value disabled children, and they don't value the elderly. They don't value the most vulnerable in society. Now, in America today, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel has written about the disability-adjusted life year, and you can read about this in The Lancet. And his idea of fairly distributing scarce resources is that when we get control of all health care and we have to distribute this fairly, how we're going to do it. The disability-adjusted life year, in his mind, is a way to evaluate, and this is a direct quote, whose life year is objectively less valuable. Really, Ezekiel, where were you in 1942? How do you believe that you have a formula to fairly distribute scarce resources based on whose life here is objectively less valuable? Now, you know, unfortunately, this isn't just about practicing cost-effective medicine, which we always want to do. This is about a basic belief in, do we serve the state, do we serve the collective, or do we serve our patients individually? I reject the idea of social justice that I have an obligation to the collective. Because when Hippocrates said, I will go into the house only for the good of the patient, he didn't know about Blue Cross third-party payment or Medicare, and he certainly hadn't pre-thought about the Nazis. But he recognized there will always be people that will whisper in the doctor's ear who may not have the doctor's best interest at heart, or the patient's best interest at heart. Thank you very much.
I must say, if the opinion columnists who typically write about these issues in the Washington Post and Washington Examiner were as lucid as these four individuals, perhaps there would be a future for Brent newspapers. We are going to now have 15 minutes of questions and answers. The way we will do this is we have a microphone set up here at the front. If you have a question for the panelists, we ask that you line up here. I would caution you that we are here now for questions, not polemics. So please make it very clear what your question is, and if you fail to do so, well, the consequences won't be too much fun. 30 seconds.
Hi, thank you for...
And if you would also, please tell us if you have one of the particular panelists that you'd like to address the question and your name.
Sure. My name is Dr. Howard Sachs. I'm a private doctor in the community here. I'm also a member of Docs for Patient Care. What I'd like to ask the people on this side is, if your sense of social justice is such full of compassion and kindness at distributing scarce resources, why do you not then expand it to other areas of the economy? People need food, people need housing, and people need clothing.
Well, you know, I think that we have to admit that there are finite resources in all sectors, and that, you know, my point is that an attention to cost control will make sure that we can meet reliably everyone's individual needs Because if we don't have a sustainable system, then no single physician-patient relationship is going to be able to thrive.
I'm not answering it. I said food, clothing, and housing.
Sir, please. Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
We do help people with food. It's called SNAP. We do help people with housing. I work at healthcare for the homeless. That's what we do every day. These are not things that are frivolous, trivial. They're basic, and we help people with those.
I would ask also if our other panelists would like to address that question.
Okay, I'll say something. Well, I would like to say thank God that they aren't doing to food system. The reason that we have the most abundant food in the world in America is because we have independent truckers, independent farmers, independent grocers, all acting in their own economic self-interest that have produced the best, cheapest food in the world. God help us if the government takes over our food system, because we've seen that. You know, the Soviets tried that and they starved. The Chinese tried that and they starved. It doesn't work. The free market produces things.
Well, we have the cheapest food system because we subsidize corn.
Yeah. Well, we make up for that by ethanol, so we can argue that. I'm from Iowa, so.
Our next question.
Dr. Jane Orient. I am the Executive Director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Question for Dr. Rahman about when you're redistributing things, what do you do about taking from one group of people to give to another? How do you make those decisions? Now, you stated that, well, if something isn't covered by insurance, then the patient can pay for it himself. This is not true if the system is Medicare in the United States or in Canada. The way social justice works is as if everybody can't have it, then you can't have it either. So it seems to me that you are disagreeing with how most people view this social justice. And do you see that it is right to say that people cannot have something just because everybody else can't have the same advantage?
Thank you for the question. There's two questions in there. One, actually social justice does not say that if everybody can't have it, nobody can. I'm not sure what philosophy that is beyond straight economic egalitarianism, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about simply having a floor, not a ceiling. Second question was about distribution and how do you take from one versus another. We're in a society. We recognize that there are public goods, and we need to fund those public goods. One of the tenets of social justice is that part of how you decide what is fair is by the veil of ignorance, by ignoring the individual characteristics and saying, what would I want the policy to be if I was anybody in society? Not if I'm the person who I am now, but if I was the CEO of a company, or a trucker, or homeless, or a welder, or whatever. A policy that's good throughout all those positions is a just policy.
That may be the case, and I won't even argue that it's not. I'll just say that that's not the role of the physician at the bedside. The role of the physician at the bedside is to do everything in his or her power to get that individual patient everything that that patient needs for health. That's the role. And the business about what social policy ought to be, that's fine. You go fight that on the policy front. But at the bedside, you had better not be practicing social justice, or you will be violating medical ethics going back thousands of years. And you will be abandoning your patients to their own devices in a very hostile healthcare system.
If I had the choice of which patients I could select, that would work.
Next question.
Yeah, it's actually a good segue. First of all, my name's Neil. I'm a first-year medical student here. You made some interesting analogies, one of them with cows. I want to extend that a little bit. So you said that what's good for the collective may not be good for the individual.
Right.
And I want to get your thoughts on if what's best for the individual is not, it's often the case that that's not best for the collective as well.
Absolutely correct.
And how you contextualize that within healthcare.
I'll be happy to answer that. Our healthcare system today is totally dysfunctional, so there's no good answer to that, except that the doctor is obligated to do everything in his or her power to help the patient, even if it goes against the collective. And because it's not the let me finish. Because it's not the doctor's job to fix the collective. I use the legal analogy. It's the lawyer's job to do everything in their power to get you off. They can talk about your ADHD or your abuse as a child to get the jury to reduce your sentence, even though that is detrimental to society, because you really are, a dirtbag. So, and if you get off, that's how the system should work. Now, it is society's job to devise a healthcare system that externally limits the spending. We can do that. There are many ways to do that. But our politicians don't want to. They'd rather push that job down to the bedside where it wrecks our profession and puts our patients in imminent danger at all times. I could give you 5 different systems right now that'll fix the problem, but it would take healthcare reform, fundamental healthcare reform. There are many ways to do it. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about what's good for the doctor-patient relationship, which is the fundamental aspect of healthcare.
I think the world doesn't operate in black and white. It operates in shades of gray. And as a practicing physician, the patient at whom I am at their bedside always trumps social justice in my mind when it comes to their individual healthcare needs. But being mindful of social justice doesn't mean that you have to abandon the individual needs of your patient. I think what it means is that just what a tangible example that I mentioned, that if you have a choice between 2 medicines and one's generic and one's brand name, and they both are going to provide the same clinical outcome, the same clinical benefit, well then social justice informs you that choosing that generic helps preserve resources for all of us. And when we think about resources, I think we can specifically talk about tax dollars. None of us want to fund this to the point where none of us have any income whatsoever. That would be awful. And of course that's not the view that my colleagues in opposition feel. They feel that it would be much better to have more of a free market-based system. And the free market-based system has plenty of merits, but unfortunately it does not create the equality of opportunity that social justice seeks.
If I may, we're going to move to our next question, but I have to say, as soon as the good doctor mentioned those cows, I started thinking about Chick-fil-A. And you are?
Hi, I'm Sue Hobby, and I'm a first-year medical student as well. And there's been a lot of talk about distribution of resources, and I believe that we as physicians are also a resource. And a lot of physicians now are choosing to move into concierge medicine, where they're serving fewer patients. So I wanted to know how you all felt about that, and specifically to you panelists, if you feel that that violates the principle of social justice.
Well, I'll speak to that.
Go ahead.
Well, how would this work in a free market? You don't get shortages in a free market, because in a free market, the people go where there are jobs, and the services expand to the need that he says. He made the point that it took 3 months for his patients to get a pulmonologist. It takes 3 months for my patients to get a pulmonologist. I mean, there's a scarcity of the scarce resources, which is us. And actually, we shouldn't sugarcoat it. In Canada, it often takes 2 to 3 years to get a primary care physician now. And they have towns in Canada that are having lotteries, because when a new doctor comes to town, there's so many people that need a doctor. So it's not a beautiful family practice life up there either. There's shortages of everybody because we have an aging population and we have not kept up. But why is that? Why do we have that? You have to back up and say, why do we have these shortages? It's the same reason that the Soviets starved, because they tried to predict, a few smart guys at the top thought they could predict how many tractors they needed to farm the fields and how many kulaks they'd leave alive to farm the fields. It doesn't work that way. A free market works because millions and millions of people with their brains, you guys that I trust with your individual smarts, would figure out how to do it. And if you didn't limit the number of residency slots, and if you didn't limit the number of medical school slots like we do, we centrally control that. And since 1976, right now, I don't know if you know this, but there are only like 5,000 practicing medical oncologists in the nation. We only trade in 600 general surgeons for general surgery a year. And every specialty is being, we were desperate in Arizona for orthopedic surgeons. I left there because I'm 60 this year, and I couldn't keep up up the pace of doing 100-hour weeks to make up for that shortage. The reason we have the shortage is because people in 1976 decided, when I was a first-year medical student, that there were just too many of those damn specialists, and now they don't have enough. So it's a problem of the lack of the free market. The only way in Economics 101, the only way you can maintain a shortage is to put your thumb on some aspect of its production, usually price controls. And in this case, it's by not allowing training.
Thank you, Doctor.
Unless you want slavery, people, you're not really advocating that we tell people that they can't do that. Honestly, we have a whole group in AAPS of doctors that actually practice cash practice. Some of them are concierge, some of them take care of the poor. So there's a niche for that helps in a lot of different ways. I don't think so. Yeah.
I suspect these folks would probably have something to say about your question.
2 points. The issue with concierge medicine is that it addresses that particular relationship, but nothing beyond that. Medicines, tests, further specialists. And that's a real gap. And that's really the problem with concierge medicine, is how do we address the remainder of the care that the person gets beyond just that relationship? And there are issues around that some are more workable than others, but that's the biggest one. But we're not really comparing ourselves to Soviet Russia. There are other models that we can look at to both learn and to inform us. We could talk about Switzerland, Germany, or France. Not everything is Canada, Nazi Germany, or Soviet Russia.
Yeah, and I would say that
about France too.
in our society, which I don't think there's ever going to be a time in America where we turn away from capitalism. There's always going to be a market for concierge medicine, and I think that market's going to continue to thrive. The market is limited because people of those sorts of means who can afford it, there's a finite number of that resource, but physicians will fill that niche, and that's not in conflict with social justice. It's just that's like my colleague said, it's much more about the individual patient there as opposed to caring for those who don't have the means and creating that equality of opportunity that social justice seeks.
I'd like to talk for a minute about the direct pay model as well. I believe this could be one of the big answers, not a problem. We have a terrible shortage of primary care physicians in this country, and I congratulate our esteemed opponents for doing this. They are practicing the most important and the most underappreciated kind of medicine there is. But only a couple percent of medical students go into primary care medicine. And part of it, it's the pay is lower, but it's always been lower. It was lower when I was in medical school, and about 40% of my class went into primary care medicine. The difference is there is no autonomy anymore in primary care medicine. You're practicing guidelines, you're doing pay for performance with checklists, you got to do these 12 things with every visit. You've got bureaucrats doing proctoscopy on you every 6 months, and going into direct pay practice where you essentially drop out of the system is not, they're not doing it for the money. Some of them are making more, some of them aren't. But they're doing it for the autonomy. They can reestablish a real doctor-patient relationship for the first time in their practice. And they can be true advocates for their patient. It's a much more rewarding type of practice. Now,
I'm in private practice. I've never been proctoscoped. And I'm in private practice, and I would think that my patients very much respect the fact that we have a wonderful patient-physician relationship.
I'm not disparaging your practice.
If we could move to our next question, because I don't want these four folks to not have an opportunity to ask theirs. And you are.
My name is Luke Womble. I'm a second-year medical student at the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda. And my question is for any of the panelists. It seems to me, and I'm also from Oklahoma, so I may not pronounce Dr. Rahman if I'm here.
Did you go to OSU or OU? Oh, did it?
Oh my goodness, you crossed the border.
I'll try to make this quick. It seems to me at the bottom of the issue is the price of healthcare today. And that is the reason why people would say we need the government or a single payer system to come in and to distribute this scarce resource. My question is, is that a failure of the market? In other words, has the market failed to keep costs low as it does in most other things and provide better services? Or are there other culprits that have led to the higher cost of medicine?
Externalities.
It's a wonderful question. And yeah, I think there's certain aspects of the healthcare market that are so different than the iPhone market. There is no price transparency in healthcare. There's really little competition because all the negotiations about price between third payers and providers generally are behind closed doors and kept secret, almost by law to be kept secret. As someone who is a very strong believer in social justice, I would also be very much in favor of price transparency and competition among providers. Compete on quality, compete on price. Absolutely. I would love to see healthcare costs lowered in a very free market way, using those free market principles. But we've not used a free market for a very long time. And so I think when we try to look at analogies between, say, the iPhone market or the TV market and the healthcare market, they really don't stand up because there's an asymmetry of information in the healthcare market. In the iPhone market, you can research what the iPhone does, its price, you can research its competitors, you can learn a lot about it. But when you're having a heart attack and you're sitting in the emergency room, you cannot start to research the other doctors in the 3 surrounding counties. You cannot ask, how much is this going to cost? How about the next hospital over? This is a life and death issue. So the healthcare market's substantially different than other free markets that are consumer-driven markets. Does that mean free market principles can't be a part of healthcare solutions? Of course not. I strongly believe in price transparency and competition. Had a stroke there. Competition so that we can encourage better quality and lower prices.
The one thing I would say to add to that is that there's 2 aspects of the free market that are difficult with health. One is that demand is extremely unpredictable on an individual basis, and also cost is unbounded at times. You know, with other needs that we have, housing is a predictable and fairly stable cost. Food, predictable, stable, clothing. But this is one of those needs that we have where tomorrow something can happen. And this is not hyperbolic. I mean, literally tomorrow something happens to people every single day. It's what we do. And you don't know how much that's going to cost you, and you don't have the ability to make those choices. And so it is a breakdown of the system for this particular thing. We have to accept that. There are free market principles, but there's a lot of uninsured people. Why?
And Dr. Heed.
Well, actually, there are, exactly in your state of Oklahoma, there's the Oklahoma Surgery Center, which is a cash pay surgery center. They charge about 1/4 to 1/2 of what the Medicare taking hospitals do. They only take cash. They get people from all over the world, all over your state, uninsured and insured alike, and honestly, they do a great job, and it's totally transparent. So to these cash practices, and because they don't have the 140,000+ pages of Medicare regulation to deal with, they're very efficient. They're not having to deal with a 50% job short down because of the EMR requirements now. So that's one point. And I will say, oh shoot, he just made a point about how it's not actually. Illness is not unpredictable. That's why we used to have that's why we had actuaries, and they had actuarially based insurance. What's unpredictable is your times that you will go in for a cold or something that's not a true insurance emergency. If we used our insurance like we use our health insurance, then when your roof blows off, you call your insurance agent, but when a shingle blows off, you reach into your pocket. If you did that for medical care, it'd be the same thing. There is actuarially based health insurance.
So you can predict how I'm going to get sick and when?
You can predict major illness. That's why they were able to sell. An actuary can tell you, on average, your chance of having a femur fracture in your lifetime. What he can't tell you is how many times you'll go in for wellness checks.
That's a probability, not a certainty. And I think you're conflating.
That's what insurance plays on. That's what they do for you.
Not your day-to-day demand, cash demand.
That's how insurance works. They can't say when you're going to break a leg, but they can say, if you give me 5,000 people with your build and your age, they'll tell you what the probability is that how many of them will break a leg over a year. In addition to price sensitivity, I agree with you on price transparency. I agree with you on that. Is price sensitivity. The people that consume health care in this country have no sensitivity at all to cost, and the people that decide what health care to give, the physicians, also have no sensitivity whatsoever to cost. And that goes along with a third-party payer system. And until we get some skin back in the game for the individual, according to their ability to pay, some amount of skin in the game, that isn't going to change.
I feel like I'm managing a newsroom. Next question.
Hi, I'm Harold Pollack. I teach health policy at the University of Chicago. where I must say, even at U of C, we don't usually compare liberals to Nazis and communists too often. But I want to ask about this lawyer analogy. You're certainly right that there's a zealous advocacy aspect, especially when someone has their life on the line. But actually, in both legal ethics and in the law, criminal defense lawyers are constrained in a lot of ways. There's certain things they're not supposed to do. And if your life is not on the line and you're a corporate lawyer defending a client, you have all sorts of obligations to share information with other parties.
Yes, you do.
And there's a sense that when there's something that's huge at stake for your client, then you have a real ethical responsibility to be a zealous advocate. But when you have something that's less huge at stake for your client, then you have more social responsibilities, and you should be thinking about more systemic issues. So it seems to me that physicians, there's something similar, that if I could give a trivial benefit to my patient, but at the same time it's going to have large impacts on other people, that I really should be thinking about that. It's not that I would not withhold a critical cancer treatment from my patient, but if, say, this MRI is really wasteful for my patient and it's going to hurt other patients, then I really should think twice about that.
And your question
and that's my question. Don't you think that sort of zealous advocacy analogy is overdrawn?
No, I don't. The system that you're describing in the law, there is a set of rules laid out by society under which lawyers must function. So there are evidentiary rules. You might not want to let the other side know that you have this letter that says so-and-so did such and such, but you have to, even though it's going to hurt your client, because that's the rule laid out by society. All I'm saying is that we ought to and could, if we chose to, do the same thing in healthcare. Set up a system that limits the amount of money society is going to spend on healthcare, and rules under which physicians can function. And within those rules, the doctor can be as zealous as they want, as long as they don't violate the rules of operation. That's what I'm saying. That's the way they do it in the law.
I think earlier Dr. Fogaros mentioned that we have, a code of ethics, a more traditional code of ethics, long before social justice ever became part of the equation. And he said that, efficiency is really a part of those traditional medical ethics. I think it gets to what Dr. Pollack just asked. But if that's the case, then why is there $800 billion annually in wasteful healthcare spending in the United States? I mean, I think that's a symptom of the fact that social justice is not accounted for.
Can I answer that question? There are two answers. One is that a lot of the wasteful spending is mandated by the bureaucracy, and the second is that just because you have an ethical precept doesn't mean everybody's going to follow it. But the cure for that not following the ethical precept is not to impose a new ethical precept. That's not the cure.
We have 3 minutes.
So right now, we're passing the bag again. You voted in the bag on the way in. We want to see if there's been any change in the way you're thinking about this.
So if you've all voted, it doesn't matter what I say now?
We'll continue.
Oh, okay.
No, we'll put the knives away.
So make sure you vote, and then we'll let you know what it was before and after.
And our next question.
Hi, my name is Toby Smith. I'm a family doctor. I work in community health centers and free clinics, and I can tell you we have a lot of people starving in this country. Just to go back to your earlier comment. I have a quick question. You talked a lot about sort of the history of medicine and things that we understand, and as a physician, you should do everything for that patient in front of you. So I'm curious what your thoughts on the acceptance of triage. When, as a physician, knowing that this patient needs this, but this patient needs something more. Yeah. So we use that as a sense of justice. I'm curious how you feel about that, if that's acceptable, if we're using limited resources. And kind of along those lines, how do you feel about physicians that speak on panels for pharmaceutical companies, if there's any conflict of interest there, or physicians that own hospitals and refer to those hospitals? Do you feel like there should be some restrictions on those? Are physicians going to be influenced, or are they still really in charge only of their patient?
And if you could, in 25 words or less.
Well, to answer your second question first, yes, that's a conflict of interest. It's a conflict of interest that exists, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. We're doing that now. I think there have been abuses, lots of abuses of that in the past. There still are. The new Sunshine Rules will take care of a good part of that. I personally don't believe that the right answer is to restrict altogether all interaction between physicians and companies, because since I left practice 10 years ago, I've been a consultant with a lot of biotech companies, and the input they get from physicians is critical in developing new products. But you do need to control the conflicts of interest, and I think the Sunshine Rule will go a long way toward doing that. Your first question was, oh, triage. Yeah, sure. So if a nuclear bomb goes off and you're sort of in the periphery where your radiation illness is fatal and it's for some and it's might not be fatal for others, in extraordinary circumstances, you've got to make quick decisions. So you put a black spot on the ones that are gone, and you move off, and you take care of the ones that you still can save. Triage is real. It happens. It happens in warfare. It happens in all kinds of natural disasters, and you've got to do the best you can. But that's not the typical situation. In the typical situation, you establish a doctor-patient relationship between individuals, and within the best of your capability, you're obligated to do the best you can for that individual.
But triage goes on every day in every emergency room across the country, and triage is the logical outcome of the application of social justice in the practice of medicine.
As well in some of our clinics in Anacostia and homeless for that.
Can I say something about that?
Please, and then we'll have our next question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a time in warfare, and that's why I bring up history, and I'm not calling liberals names, I'm just talking about history, because the Germans were at war, and there is a wartime, we're all trained in military triage. However, what you see, for example, in Canada is government. There's triage that was brought about by the government's policies. And so my friend who's a neuroradiologist in Canada has to triage who gets at the head of the line for a CAT scan and who gets 6 months down the line, because the machines are always broken, because there's no positive incentive to keep the CT scans running. And he said for him, he didn't want to do it because it felt like he was killing people, because if he made the wrong decision, he put somebody with back pain, for example, at the end of the line only to happen to read that CT scan and found out it was a big tumor. And he said, I felt like I was that guy at Auschwitz, deciding who lived and who died. It was a terrible situation, and that's avoidable. In Canada, if you're a cat, you can get a CT scan like that for cash, but you can't if you're a human. So it's a government, it's like the idea that we only have a certain amount of resources. No, in a free market, we'll create more. And that's why there are more MRI scanners in Seattle than there are in all of British Columbia. And so you have to let the market make these available, so you don't have to do that horrible triage in a free market.
I want to give you an opportunity if you wanted to respond to those.
I can assure my colleague that we are not trying to constrain resources. No. We're trying to get them to people who don't have them. You bring up Canada a lot, Dr. Heap, and I just want to point out that the tenets of social justice actually don't constrain individuals. I would proffer that the Canadian system isn't actually observing those. We can all have our disagreements with the Canadian system, but what we're talking about is the U.S. system, where there are haves, have-a-lots, and have-nots. So if we want to talk about triage, I invite anybody. You can find me to come to Healthcare for the Homeless in Baltimore. There's a line that forms outside our building at 4:30 in the morning, because we have finite resources. We triage every single day, and it sucks.
Yes, sir. Your name?
My name is Alex. I'm a community organizer in Virginia. And I just had two real short questions. The first to you guys, so if you guys believe that the sort of the free market and whoever has the most money should be able to determine how and when they get care, do you then disagree with our current system for allocating organ donations and who gets that? It's an agreed upon system that our society has decided who gets what, when, and how. And then real fast, secondly, over to the left, now they like to bring up the analogy of the doctor-patient and the lawyer advocate-lawyer relationship. And I want to find out if you guys believe that that's a little bit different from a lawyering relationship, in that the lawyer is not the administrator of justice, but rather the advocate. The judge and the jury are the administrators of justice, whereas the doctor is the administrator of medicine, not the advocate of the patient.
Okay. All right. I'd like for you guys to answer the first question.
Remind me what it was. I've got it tied up in organ donation and should the rich people get what they want. the distinction, I think, is between whether there's a real God-given shortage as an organ donation. There's really only a finite number of organs, and I have no problem with, well, I have a couple of niggling points with the organ donation system, but overall, in general, I think it's fine. That, I think, though, is different than the system that we've got now, which in my opinion is coercing physicians to ration health care at the bedside covertly because of policy. I think that's very bad. And I think it's fundamentally different from organ donation, because one is an artificial system where they're trying to foist the solution down to the physician-patient level. I think if we're going to limit the healthcare spending, we ought to have a system of an open, transparent system of rationing, because that's what it'll be. And within that system of rationing, physicians need to be advocating the best they can for their patients within that system.
John. I'm going to get to your point in a second, but the point isn't to ration healthcare at the bedside. It's to have an ethical framework to allocate scarce resources before you get to the bedside, so that you're treating everybody fairly when you don't have infinite resources.
I would argue that the Charter on Medical Professionalism specifically was devised to make it ethical for physicians to, let's not use the word rationing, that's like the N word, it's an R word. Let's say for the physicians to decide who gets what, when, and how. And
we make that decision every day.
You know, if you look at the derivation of the Charter, it started out specifically saying that, and the people that wrote it argued that, yes, who better to make these decisions than the physician at the bedside? And they took the language out in the final version to mollify people, but it was very clear what their purpose was.
If we could, I want to make certain that this gentleman who has stood here the longest of any of us gets to ask his question.
Hey, it's you.
Please, go ahead. Your name.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Jorge Campaña, and I'm an ophthalmologist in private practice in Falls Church, Virginia. I've been in private practice for about 30 years. Going back to the unfairness of this fair social doctrine, aren't we instituting a system where the available dollars that are available to the physician in the trenches who are treating patients be reduced by instituting this huge leviathan of bureaucracy? Will not the very fact that in our attempt to be more fair will actually create more unfairness?
Less fairness.
And my second question is, a lot of the time that we have all these, quote unquote unnecessary tests is because of the legal ramifications. Shouldn't tort reform also go hand in hand in providing a more fair social justice for physicians and patients?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'd like to say, I think what's always instructed me in debates like this is that many of us in this room, regardless of how we approach a problem, we share a lot in common. What happens is we look at this from different perspectives. And I don't necessarily see the world in black and white. I see lots of shades of gray. And so, I don't take the philosophical position that bureaucracy is always going to be bad. I am my patient's advocate. I am. But without considering social justice, we can't possibly protect scarce resources. Should we have tort reform so that physicians who are practicing evidence-based medicine are protected from legal lawsuits? Of course. Of course. That's only common sense. Should we have price transparency so that we can drive costs down? Of course. That's only common sense. Should patients be more cost conscious? Of course. That's only common sense. But what we're talking about in terms of differences is just kind of this cost consciousness of physicians in terms of the medicine they're administering. And I do think there is a lot of wasteful tests when the fear of lawsuits can be terribly overblown. I really can't find the justification for routine, non-complicated back pain to perform an MRI. Now, if my patient has a radiculopathy and he's got some neurologic signs, you bet your butt I'm going to order that MRI in a heartbeat. So I'm still putting the needs of my patient first. But in the consideration of social justice, I'm trying to cut out wasteful, unnecessary care. And that's really the perspective that I'm coming from, where we share so much common ground.
Oh, I just want to...
And if I may, if one of you all would like to respond, it will be our closing comment before you hear a decision that I have a feeling you're all going to be quite surprised by.
I just like to say that, you know, there's always more health care than any one person, any one system, anybody can afford. And I think this all boils down to who do you want to make the decisions. You know.
Beth?
Nice summation.
Thank you, guys. What I was struck with, I don't know about you, but I was struck with there are a number of very important things that are in agreement on the two sides. Places where you can stand together and try and move forward. That's encouraging. So that was my take home from this talk, which was, I thought, pretty positive. So the undecideds. There were 19 of them at the beginning, and there were 7 at the end. But that's not because they made up their mind. They just didn't vote. So we have a tie. The way this works is that whoever sways the most votes to their side wins. So you can win the popular vote, but still lose the debate, right? Okay, but so whoever those undecideds that didn't vote, they really blew it, because what we did was we had 17 for this side, end up with 18, so they got one more vote. Started off with 22, and they ended up with 23, so they got one more vote. So it's a tie, which right? Okay? And I think that's very appropriate. I think we had 4 very eloquent, compassionate, and passionate physicians arguing what they believed in. And I hope that at least there was some more clarity about some of the issues that we're struggling with, even if nobody changed their mind. You can at least come to understand that both sides, or many sides, because I don't think there were just 2 sides up here that were talked about, can come at this with wanting to find a compassionate solution to the challenges that we face in this country about the lack of access and quality health care for our fellow citizens. And that everybody is concerned about that. Everybody wants a solution. We just have some differences about how we think are the best ways to get there. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. Eat the food. I paid for it. Thank you.
Before you go, if I may, I was just handed a note. There are still 10 precincts on the south side of Chicago that have not reported yet.
We need a drink. Yeah.
Good night.
That's what I'm determined.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Glad I went to the right
Thank you very
university.
much.
Yeah.
There's one side that couldn't vote.